My parents looked me straight in the eye while I was in labor and said, "Call a cab." Then, just 1 week later, my mom showed up at my door wanting to meet the baby. I looked at her and said, "What baby?" I was flying down Interstate 35 at 73 miles an hour, deep into active labor, when it finally hit me that my parents were never going to change. It wasn't because I had some life-changing realization. It wasn't therapy, journaling, or one of those heartfelt conversations over coffee that finally opened my eyes. The truth hit me while I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt, trying to survive a contraction so powerful that the edges of my vision turned completely white. I was all by myself, driving to the emergency room, while back in Round Rock my mother was topping off a man named Vincent's wine glass and laughing at a joke that wasn't even funny. That was the exact moment everything changed. Not some symbolic turning point, but a real one. It was 9:17 on a Friday night in September. The lights of downtown Austin shimmered in the distance as a semi-truck started drifting into my lane. Another contraction crushed every bit of air out of my lungs, and the only way I could stay focused was by counting the white lane markings on the highway. 4, 5, 6. Breathe, Evelyn. Just keep driving. Your baby is counting on you to make it. I've replayed that drive more times than I can count. But I also keep replaying what happened in my parents' dining room. I still see that heavy oak table, the expensive china my mother only used whenever she wanted to impress people with money, and the roast beef sitting in the middle of the table like it had been placed there as some sacrifice to their endless vanity. I can still hear my father's voice too. Calm. Cold. Condescending. He folded his arms across his chest and casually delivered the sentence that destroyed our relationship as if he were turning down another slice of pie. Call a cab. We're busy. 7 simple words. That was all it took to erase 27 years. Before the rest of this story makes sense, you need to understand the kind of family I grew up in. I was what people call a glass child. If you've never heard that expression before, it describes the kid everyone overlooks because they seem so capable. The child who stays quiet, handles everything alone, and becomes practically invisible because the adults assume they're doing just fine. Glass children don't ask for much. They don't scream for attention, throw tantrums in grocery stores, or constantly need rescuing. They quietly carry whatever life throws at them because they learn early on that nobody is coming to save them anyway. My younger sister, Sabrina, was the complete opposite. At 25, she looked like she'd rolled straight out of a luxury car commercial, and for as long as I could remember, she had been the center of my parents' entire world. She was the daughter they woke up before sunrise to drive to dance recitals. She was the one my mother cried over during award ceremonies, gently dabbing tears from her eyes with one of her embroidered handkerchiefs. She was the one my father rearranged his entire life around because Sabrina's problems were always urgent, important, and impossible to ignore. Mine never seemed to be. When I was 10 years old, I crashed my bicycle and broke my left arm so badly that the bone pushed against the skin like it was trying to poke through. I walked inside and told my mom what had happened. My voice shook, but I stayed as calm as I could because I'd already figured out that in our family, staying composed was the only way anyone might take you seriously. She glanced at my arm, then looked at the clock. Sabrina's recital starts in 40 minutes, she said. It's her first solo. Then she asked, "Can you just put some ice on it until we get back?" So I did. I sat there with ice wrapped around my broken arm for 4 hours. I'm telling you that because it's important. The history matters. 17 years later, when I was sitting in that dining room while my body was going into labor, my mother looked at me with irritation instead of concern. The whole scene felt so familiar that, for a moment, it barely even hurt. Almost. I'd been married to Nathan Brooks for 3 years before everything came crashing down. Nathan was 29 years old, a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Austin. More importantly, he was the kind of man who could tell I'd had a terrible day before I'd even said a word. We met at a college mixer, dated for 4 years, and eventually got married in a small ceremony. My parents showed up, although they acted like it was a burden because Sabrina had scheduled a spa weekend at the same time, and according to my mother, dealing with both events created unnecessary stress. Nathan and I built a quiet life together. We chose that life on purpose. I run a freelance marketing business from our apartment, mostly helping small businesses and nonprofit organizations create marketing campaigns on my own schedule. By my parents' standards, we weren't rich. But we were comfortable. We didn't owe anyone money. And we never wasted cash trying to impress people whose opinions didn't matter. That alone put us in a completely different world than my parents, Margaret and Ronald. They lived in a nice suburban neighborhood in Round Rock, about 25 minutes north of Austin. From the outside, they looked like the picture of a successful upper-middle-class family. There was always a new car parked in the driveway, neatly trimmed landscaping, and a dining room filled with expensive china. But I'd known since I was a teenager that almost all of it was financed. The china hadn't been paid off. The landscaping had gone onto a Visa card. My father had been quietly sinking deeper into debt for at least 10 years, desperately trying to keep up the appearance that everything was perfect. That part matters too. Because when Sabrina introduced them to a man named Vincent, they didn't just see her boyfriend. They saw someone they believed could rescue them. Vincent Romano was 32 years old. He drove a leased Porsche, wore designer blazers that were always just a little too tight across his shoulders, and carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who had spent years making appearances seem more valuable than reality. He claimed he had founded a tech startup called Apex Dynamics. Every time he described the company, the explanation changed just enough to sound impressive while somehow saying almost nothing. He loved throwing around phrases like scalable infrastructure, proprietary machine learning architecture, and projections of a 9-figure valuation by the third year. My father nodded along every single time, the way people nod through a sermon delivered in a language they don't actually understand. He looked fascinated. I wasn't convinced he understood a single word. Before that Friday dinner, I'd only met Vincent once. It had been a quick introduction at my parents' house about 2 months earlier. My first impression was simple. He looked polished on the outside, but underneath, he felt completely hollow. Like a showroom display that looked perfect until you realized it wasn't built for real life. My parents saw something entirely different. To them, Vincent looked like the answer to every financial prayer they'd been silently making for the past decade. My mother called me 4 separate times that week just to make sure I was coming to dinner. 4 times. Each phone call was more persistent than the one before, wrapped in the same carefully perfected guilt she'd been using on me for most of my life. "It's important, Evelyn," she kept saying. "Vincent is serious about Sabrina. This could change everything for our family." I was 39 weeks pregnant. I was completely worn out. Every instinct I had told me to stay home. But I went anyway. Because even at 27 years old, I was still that invisible glass child hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earn a place at the table. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 6:45 that evening. The good china was already waiting on the table. The first warning sign was right there in front of me, and I ignored it almost instantly. "They're just excited," I told myself. This is a huge night for Sabrina. Let them enjoy it. Vincent was already sitting at the head of the table, right where my father always sat. Not a single person mentioned it. When I walked in, he was in the middle of a long speech about raising his series of funding. My father leaned toward him with bright, eager eyes, looking like a man already figuring out how much money he might someday make from the deal. Sabrina sat pressed tightly against Vincent, wearing the satisfied smile of someone convinced she'd landed the biggest prize in the room. I slipped into my seat near the far end of the table. By then, I'd already started feeling that familiar ache in my lower back. It wrapped around toward the front of my stomach, the same uncomfortable pressure that had been coming and going all week. Braxton Hicks, I reminded myself as I shifted in my chair. Totally normal. I've still got about a week left. Relax. Asterisk. The roast beef smelled amazing. Then, for some reason, it suddenly didn't. I brushed the feeling aside, smiled politely as my mother handed me the potatoes, and tried not to think about it. The first real contraction hit at exactly 7:22. This wasn't the dull practice tightening I'd been dealing with. This was different. The pressure began deep in my spine before rolling around my body like a giant fist squeezing every inch of my middle. I grabbed the edge of the table and focused on my breathing. 4 seconds in. Hold for 2. 6 seconds out. Across the table, Vincent was still talking about how endlessly scalable his platform supposedly was. Essentially unlimited, he said confidently before taking another slow sip of the wine my mother had poured for him as carefully as if she were serving something sacred. My mother glanced in my direction. Her eyes narrowed. "Evelyn, you're fidgeting again. Can you please stop?" "Sorry," I answered automatically. 27 years of conditioning packed into a single word. Sorry for existing where you could see me. Sorry that my body was doing something inconvenient. Sorry for everything. 9 minutes later, another contraction arrived. It was stronger. Sharper. The kind that demanded my body's full attention whether I wanted to give it or not. I pressed my lips together until they almost went numb and quietly reached beneath the table for my phone. I sent Nathan a text. Asterisk, I think it's starting. Asterisk. Asterisk contractions. I'm going to try leaving soon. Asterisk. Asterisk, you probably won't see this for a while because of the server migration, but just in case asterisk. I knew there was a good chance he wouldn't read it for hours. His team was right in the middle of moving an entire data center, one of those IT disasters where engineers practically surrender their phones and disappear until everything stops catching fire. I looked around the table. My father couldn't take his eyes off Vincent. My mother was happily topping off everyone's wine. Sabrina lazily traced circles across Vincent's forearm with one fingertip. I was sitting in a room full of my own family. I'd never felt lonelier. The third contraction came at 7:41. 8 minutes after the last one. By then, the pain had sharpened into something I couldn't hide behind a polite smile anymore. Heat spread across my face. A drop of sweat slid down my back underneath my maternity dress. Something deep inside me spoke with absolute certainty. Asterisk, this is real. Asterisk. Asterisk, this isn't Braxton Hicks. Asterisk. Asterisk, you need to leave. Right now. Asterisk. I started trying to figure out the least disruptive way to excuse myself. How could I quietly slip away? How could I avoid interrupting everyone? Because after 27 years in that family, my first instinct was still to disappear rather than inconvenience anyone else. Then my body made the decision for me. I heard a quiet pop. Only I noticed it. The warmth came instantly. My water broke at exactly 7:44. Right there in my mother's dining room. Right in the middle of Vincent's speech about machine learning architecture. I shoved my chair backward. Its wooden legs scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. Every head at the table turned toward me. What on earth, my mother began. I stood up, gripping the back of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. Another contraction slammed into me almost immediately. It was so powerful my body wanted to fold in half. I refused. Somehow, I forced myself to stay standing. My water broke, I said. My voice trembled, but everyone heard me. I'm in labor. The contractions are really close together. I need to get to Dell Medical right now. I need one of you to drive me. Silence. For one long heartbeat, nobody spoke. I watched my father's face carefully. I could actually see him thinking. His eyes tightened ever so slightly. He glanced toward Vincent. He weighed the social consequences. Then he made his choice. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Are you serious right now? My mother asked. Her voice dropped into that cold, cutting whisper she always used whenever she wanted to punish someone without making a scene. Evelyn, Vincent was just getting to the most important part. This dinner is. Mom. My voice cracked. Only a little. I'm in labor. My son is coming tonight. Please. Sabrina quietly set down her fork. Oh, God, Penny. She sounded exhausted. Like I'd broken some unspoken social rule. You're always doing this. Everything has to be about you. Can't you let me have one dinner? My father slowly leaned forward again, his expression calm and completely convinced he was being reasonable. Evelyn, he said evenly, this dinner is critical for our family's future. He gestured toward Vincent. He's talking about serious money. We can't just walk away from all of this because your timing is bad. Then he calmly picked up his wine glass. Call a cab. We're busy. I've spent countless nights replaying that moment in my head. Thinking about all the things I wish I'd said. Imagining the perfect response that would have left them speechless. None of those words came. Instead, I quietly picked up my purse. I walked out the front door. I never looked back. The September heat hit me the second I stepped outside, thick and heavy like walking into a wall. I stood on the porch for about 3 seconds. Waiting. Listening. Hoping someone would come after me. Nobody did. Through the front window I could still see the warm glow of the chandelier. Their shadows settled comfortably back into their seats. A moment later, I heard my father's laughter. Then another contraction hit. It dropped me straight onto my knees. The sound that escaped my throat wasn't quite a gasp. It wasn't exactly a sob either. It was something raw. Something completely instinctive. My hand slammed against the concrete porch. I forced myself to breathe. 4 in. Hold for 2. 6 out. Again. Again. Until I could finally stand. When I managed to get back on my feet, I slowly walked to my car. Even climbing into the driver's seat felt impossible. Every movement sent sharp waves of pain through my pelvis. I sat there shaking for several long seconds before finally turning the key. Drive. Asterisk. Your baby needs you to drive. I backed out of the driveway, pulled onto the street, and never once looked back at the house. I never saw that house again. Driving south on Interstate 35 around 8 o'clock on a Friday night in September is miserable under the best circumstances. Traffic was heavy. Construction barrels squeezed everyone together near the Palmer exit. Austin drivers treated every lane change like a personal competition. And somehow, I was navigating all of it while in active labor. By the time I merged onto the highway, my contractions were coming every 6 minutes. Every time another contraction hit, my body wanted me to shut my eyes and surrender to the pain. I had to fight that instinct with everything I had. Instead, I fixed my eyes on the white dashed lines painted across the highway and counted them one by one. 1, 2, 3. Don't close your eyes. Near the Rundberg exit, a semi-truck slowly drifted into my lane. I slammed on the horn. The driver corrected just in time. My heartbeat didn't settle back down for another 2 miles. Without taking my eyes off the road, I hit the voice command on my steering wheel. Call Olivia. Olivia Bennett had been my best friend ever since our junior year of college. We met in an 8 o'clock marketing class when she sat beside me and whispered the funniest, and most accurate, description of our professor I'd ever heard. She's exactly the person you want beside you when your world starts falling apart. She's smart, kind, decisive, and completely incapable of pretending everything is okay when it clearly isn't. She answered before the phone had even rung 3 times. Hey, what's going on? Jazz. Another contraction ripped through me, forcing me to bite off the rest of her name. I'm in labor. I'm on I-35. I'm driving myself to the hospital. I heard something crash on her end of the line. What? Where's Nathan? And where are your parents? You were literally just. Nathan's phone is off, I managed between breaths. Server migration. I forced another breath into my lungs. My parents told me to call a cab. For the briefest moment, Olivia didn't say anything. Then her voice came back. I'd never heard it sound like that before. It was quiet. Controlled. But underneath it burned the kind of anger that meant she had already decided exactly what she was going to do. They did what? Jazz, I need you to. I'm already putting my shoes on, she interrupted. Go straight to Dell Medical. Use the emergency entrance. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Keep your eyes on the road. Don't even think about looking at your phone. The second we hang up, I'm calling Nathan's office. If I have to get security to drag him out of that server room themselves, that's exactly what's going to happen. She paused just long enough to soften her voice. You're going to make it, Penny. You hear me? You're going to make it. I just need you to keep driving. Okay? Just drive. The call ended. I tightened my grip on the wheel and pressed harder on the gas. At 8:31 that night, the emergency entrance to Dell Medical Center appeared out of the darkness like a lighthouse guiding me home. I pulled into the drop-off area at an angle that probably made no sense to anyone but me, shoved the car into park, and climbed out while the engine was still running. I honestly didn't care. I got to my feet, grabbed the roof of the car to steady myself, and managed maybe 4 steps before a security guard spotted me. He couldn't have been older than 22. His expression changed instantly. 1 second he looked bored. The next, he was shouting at the top of his lungs. I need a wheelchair. Someone get me a wheelchair now. The sliding doors flew open. 2 nurses hurried outside at a controlled run. One of them, a woman with closely cropped hair and the calm confidence that comes from years of experience, reached me before I'd even realized someone had brought the wheelchair over. She guided me into it smoothly. How far apart are the contractions? She asked as she immediately pushed me inside. About 6 minutes. Maybe less. My own voice sounded strangely distant. My water broke around an hour ago. She looked at me for a second. You drove yourself here? Yes. She didn't comment. But I saw something change in her expression. Her jaw tightened ever so slightly. From that point on, everything happened fast. There was triage. Monitors. Someone helping me out of my soaked dress and into a hospital gown. A nurse named Monica calmly started in 4 while reading off my vital signs with the effortless confidence of someone who did this every single day. Then the triage doors burst open. Nathan. He still had his employee badge hanging around his neck. His dress shirt was soaked with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, terrified, and desperately searching the room. Penny. He crossed the room in 4 quick strides and wrapped both hands around mine. The second he touched me, something inside my chest finally let go. I'd been carrying that weight ever since I walked out of my parents' dining room. I'm here, he whispered. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I'm right here. You're here, I answered. That was all I needed. Our son arrived at 12:47 that morning. He entered the world furious, screaming before he was even completely delivered, making his opinion about the whole experience perfectly clear. At that moment, it honestly felt like he was the first member of my family in years willing to express exactly how he felt. Dr. Claire Bennett had been calmly leading the delivery from the moment she walked into the room. She had over 12 years of experience in obstetrics, and every movement she made was steady and reassuring. Once everything was over, she gently placed my son on my chest. The instant he touched me, he stopped crying. His tiny little hand curled against my collarbone. His eyes were dark, unfocused, and completely new to the world. Somehow they settled on my face, almost as if he recognized me. I looked down at my 6-pound, 4-ounce baby boy. He needed me completely. There was nothing complicated about it. In less than 10 seconds, my entire understanding of what family was supposed to be completely changed. Nathan rested his forehead against mine. His tears landed softly on my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away. Outside the room, Olivia kept texting Nathan updates every 20 minutes before he'd made it inside. She even slipped terrible jokes into her messages just to keep him from completely falling apart. Meanwhile, Nathan's parents, Walter and Elaine, had gotten the call from the delivery room and immediately started driving down from the Dallas suburbs. They were already somewhere on Interstate 35, heading straight toward us. That's what real family does. They come toward you. A little after 2 in the morning, my phone lit up on the bedside table. 4 missed calls. Every one of them from my mother. 1 missed call from my father. Not a single text message. Not one person had asked if I was okay. I put the phone on speaker. Nathan sat quietly beside me while our son slept peacefully in the bassinet between us. Then my mother's voicemail started playing. Her voice filled the room. Sharp. Annoyed. Not even the slightest hint that she'd been worried. Evelyn, it's your mother. It's 11:30. Your father and I are extremely disappointed by the dramatic way you left dinner tonight. Sabrina was in tears. You completely ruined the evening, and Vincent ended up leaving early because everything became so awkward. You were obviously just having Braxton Hicks contractions and making a scene for attention. Call me tomorrow. You owe your sister an apology. Her relationship with Vincent is incredibly important for this family, and you're not going to destroy it. Good night. That was it. She never once asked whether I'd made it to the hospital. She'd simply decided I'd been pretending. Then my father's message played. Penny, it's Dad. Listen. Your mother is very upset. That dinner really mattered. Vincent's company could bring real investment opportunities. We're talking about serious money. The kind that could completely change things for us. You know how difficult things have been financially. I expect you to fix this. And let us know when you're finished pouting. The voicemail ended. Silence settled over the room. Our son let out the tiniest sleepy sigh from his bassinet. It sounded almost like a period at the end of a sentence. Nathan slowly stood up. Without saying a single word, he picked up my phone. He didn't ask my permission. He opened my contacts and quietly blocked 3 numbers. One after another. The only sound in the room was the soft tapping of his thumb against the screen. Tap. Mom. Blocked. Tap. Dad. Blocked. Tap. Sabrina. Blocked. Nathan placed my phone face down on the table. Then he took out his own phone and blocked them there too. I watched him do it, and for the first time in years, I felt the links of a chain I'd been carrying my whole life begin to break apart, one by one. The weeks after that were the hardest I'd ever lived through. At the same time, they were the clearest I'd ever seen my life. Healing after giving birth while also accepting that your relationship with your family is over is something I wouldn't wish on anybody. Your body is trying to put itself back together. Your hormones are doing whatever they want. You're surviving on almost no sleep while learning feeding schedules, diaper changes, and how socks somehow exist in sizes small enough to fit a newborn. And all the while, somewhere in the back of your mind, your entire childhood is quietly collapsing under the weight of the truth. At 3 in the morning, while feeding my son, I found myself grieving my parents. I know that sounds strange. They weren't dead. They were only 25 minutes away in Round Rock, probably watching television or eating a late-night bowl of cereal. But grief doesn't only happen after someone dies. Sometimes it comes from accepting that you've lost something you never truly had. I wasn't mourning the parents who existed. I was mourning the parents I'd spent 27 years believing they might someday become. That Friday night had answered the question forever. I got my answer while driving 73 miles an hour down Interstate 35. 2 days after our son was born, Nathan's parents arrived. Walter and Elaine drove all the way from the Dallas area with the back of their car packed full of groceries, a portable bassinet stand, and a casserole that filled the apartment with the smell of garlic and browned butter the moment they carried it inside. Elaine looked at me once. My hair hadn't been washed. Dark circles sat beneath my eyes. I had the distant, exhausted look of someone surviving on 40-minute naps. Without saying another word, she wrapped me in a gentle hug. "Go take a shower," she said firmly. "I've got the baby. Walter's making dinner. You're going to eat a hot meal and wash your hair." And no, that's not a suggestion. Walter wasn't much of a talker. He communicated through quiet acts of kindness instead. By the time Elaine finished speaking, he'd already tied on an apron and was standing in our kitchen, carefully studying the spice cabinet like it was the most important job in the world. I stayed in that shower for 22 minutes. And I cried. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was grieving. I cried because someone was finally taking care of me. Someone had looked at me, recognized exactly what I needed, and simply gave it to me. No guilt. No scorekeeping. No expectation that I'd someday repay the favor. No conditions. Standing under that hot water, I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like. I was 27 years old before I experienced that feeling for the very first time. The harassment started the following Tuesday. Blocking phone numbers only closed one path to me. My parents found another. I was sitting on the couch feeding my son when my phone buzzed. Someone had commented on a public photo I'd posted months earlier. The account had no followers. No profile picture. Its username looked like someone had slammed both hands across a keyboard. The comment read, **, it's really sad how pregnancy hormones turned you into such a selfish attention seeker. **, ruining a family dinner just because your sister finally found a successful man says everything about your character. **, your parents deserve an apology. **. I read it twice. The wording gave it away. Successful man. The complete lack of self-awareness. It sounded exactly like Sabrina. Or my mother. Probably both of them sitting together at the kitchen table in Round Rock, creating fake accounts because they'd somehow convinced themselves harassment would force me to come back. Another fake profile appeared before the day ended. A third one showed up the next morning. Each account rewrote that night a little differently. According to them, I was dramatic. I wanted attention. I'd emotionally traumatized Sabrina. I'd scared Vincent. And somehow I'd destroyed an important business opportunity simply because I'd had the nerve to go into labor during dinner. Without saying anything, I handed my phone to Nathan. He quietly read every comment. Then he walked over to his laptop and sat down. Nathan had spent the last 7 years designing and protecting software systems. Watching him secure my online accounts was like watching someone lock down a building before a hurricane. Every privacy setting was turned to the maximum. He blocked every fake account. Deleted every comment. Then he tightened every privacy setting on every social media account I had. Then he repeated the entire process on his own social media. Just to be safe, he also reported every account through each platform's harassment system. About 40 minutes later, he handed my phone back. "They're gone," he said. "They can't comment anymore. They can't message you. They can't tag you. Your profile is locked down. As far as social media is concerned, you don't exist to them anymore." I looked over at my son sleeping peacefully in his bassinet. Good, I thought. That's exactly how it should be. The next Saturday morning, they showed up at our apartment. The doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession. Sharp. Demanding. It was the kind of knock made by people who believed everyone should be happy they had arrived. Nathan checked the peephole camera from his phone. I watched every bit of color drain from his face. "It's your parents," he said quietly. "And Sabrina." They were standing outside holding a bunch of blue "It's a Boy" balloons. One of them carried a gift bag that looked like it had been thrown together in 5 minutes at the nearest CVS. The nerve of it almost took my breath away. They'd left me to drive myself through active labor. They'd blamed me for ruining dinner. They'd spent an entire week hiding behind fake accounts to attack me online. And now they stood outside my apartment smiling like this was a perfectly ordinary family visit. Nathan started walking toward the door. I reached out and gently grabbed his arm. "No," I said. "I'm handling this." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click echoed through the quiet hallway. Then I opened the door. The instant my mother saw me, her face transformed into the warm, practiced smile she'd perfected over decades. "Evelyn, sweetheart." "You're not coming inside," I interrupted. Her smile faltered. "Only for a second." Then she adjusted it. "Penny." My father stepped forward wearing the same patient, condescending expression he always used whenever he believed he was the reasonable one. "We drove all the way here," he said. "We brought gifts. You've made your point. Let's act like adults." I looked him straight in the eye. "You told me to call a cab." My voice stayed perfectly calm. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. 7 days had turned my grief into something solid. Something sharp. "You were in the middle of your presentation," Sabrina interrupted. Vincent was explaining. "I'm not talking to you," I said. Something in my voice made her stop speaking immediately. Then I looked directly at my mother. "You left me a voicemail accusing me of pretending to be in labor just to get attention. You never asked if I even made it to the hospital," I said. "You never asked whether your grandson was okay." I let those words hang in the hallway for a full second. "And now you're standing here expecting me to invite you inside to meet a baby you were willing to let be born on the side of Interstate 35. The color drained from my mother's carefully practiced smile. Then her face turned deep red. The performance disappeared. Standing in front of me was the mother I had always known, the one who believed anger was the appropriate response whenever someone held her accountable. "How dare you," she snapped. "You want to see your grandchild?" I asked. The words came out with a calmness that even surprised me. "You keep calling him your grandson. But when I stood in your dining room begging for help while I was in labor, you didn't see a grandson. You saw an inconvenience." My voice trembled now. Not because I was afraid. Because 27 years of swallowed hurt were finally finding their way out. "So let me ask you one question. What grandchild?" "You told me to leave. So I left. And I'm never coming back." The hallway fell silent. My mother opened her mouth as if she had a response ready. Nothing came out. Nathan stepped forward beside me. His voice stayed calm, but there wasn't a trace of hesitation in it. "You have 1 minute to leave this building. If you're still here after that, I'll contact the Austin Police Department and report you for criminal trespassing. I'll also include today's visit with the harassment complaint. I've saved the voicemails. I've documented the fake social media accounts. And this entire conversation has been recorded." He pointed toward the security camera mounted above our apartment door. Knowing Nathan, it was top-of-the-line equipment. It had captured every second. "I'm not making a request," he said. "I'm informing you." The color disappeared from my father's face. Without saying a word, he grabbed my mother's arm. Sabrina had already backed away toward the elevator. Her phone was in her hand, and she clearly wanted nothing to do with whatever disaster her parents had created. Before leaving, my father looked at me one last time. His expression shifted from anger to outrage. And then, for the briefest instant, something that looked almost like shame crossed his face. Then he turned around and walked away. My mother gave me the same look she'd worn my entire life. The look that made me feel like my biggest mistake had simply been existing. Then she followed him down the hallway. I quietly closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my back against the door, closed my eyes, and released a breath I'd been holding for 27 years. Nathan stepped closer and gently placed his hand against my cheek. I leaned into it. From the bassinet in the living room came a tiny little sound. Not a cry. Not distress. Just a sleepy reminder that he was there. Asterisk, I'm here. Asterisk. That's what it sounded like. I smiled to myself. I know, I answered silently. Asterisk, so am I. Asterisk. 7 months passed. Our son learned to follow moving objects with his eyes. Then he learned how to wrap his whole tiny hand around one of our fingers. Before long, he'd also developed loud opinions about absolutely everything. Nathan was promoted to lead engineer. My freelance marketing business finally crossed $5,000 a month in income. As for my parents, we heard absolutely nothing. Not one phone call. Not one letter. Apparently, the possibility of a harassment complaint had convinced them to stay away. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in the middle of April, I was finishing a proposal at a cafe downtown when Olivia dropped into the chair across from me. She had that unmistakable expression she always wore when she'd been sitting on a huge piece of news and couldn't wait another second to tell me. I have to tell you something. I looked up from my laptop. Okay. I ran into Mrs. Carter at the grocery store. Mrs. Carter had lived 3 houses down from my parents for as long as I could remember. She was in her late 60s, endlessly cheerful, and somehow knew everything that happened within half a mile of her front porch. She never seemed nosy. She simply noticed everything. And? I asked. Olivia leaned closer. Vincent was a fraud. I slowly set my coffee cup onto the table. What do you mean? That startup. Apex Dynamics. The machine learning platform. It was all fake. There wasn't any revolutionary technology. There wasn't really anything. He convinced angel investors to hand over money, paid himself a nice salary, leased that Porsche, and never actually built a product. When investors finally demanded audits a few months ago, everything collapsed. He filed for bankruptcy. She paused. Then added the part that mattered most. And then he disappeared. He dumped Sabrina. He left Austin. He left Texas. Some people think he skipped town before fraud charges could catch up with him. Around us, the cafe carried on like nothing had happened. Someone laughed near the counter. A barista called out another drink order. I looked at Olivia. Very carefully, I asked, did my parents invest? She sighed. It was the kind of sigh someone lets out before delivering terrible news. They refinanced the house. According to Mrs. Carter, my father had proudly told neighbors back in October that they were getting in on the ground floor of Vincent's company. They invested every dollar they could borrow. When Vincent disappeared, so did their money. Olivia hesitated before finishing. They're facing foreclosure. Sabrina moved back home. She spent almost everything she had trying to keep up Vincent's lifestyle. Their credit is destroyed. I sat there quietly for a long time. I'd always imagined that if this day ever came, I'd feel victorious. I thought there would be satisfaction. Justice. The feeling that life had finally balanced the scales. Instead, I just felt sad. They'd gambled everything on the appearance of wealth. In the process, they'd thrown away their daughter. Their grandson. Their chance at having a real family. All for a man in an expensive blazer who had been lying to them from the moment they met him. They chose the performance of success instead of the real thing. And the performance disappeared the moment reality finally caught up. This isn't how I expected to feel, I admitted. Olivia reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. I know. But none of this is your fault. It never was. She was right. For years I'd been the invisible child. The capable one. The easy one. The one who kept believing that eventually my parents would finally notice me. In the end, they looked everywhere except at me. Everything they built their future around disappeared. Meanwhile, in my quiet apartment, surrounded by my husband, my son, and the people who truly loved us, we'd built something real. These days, my son is learning to walk. Every step is wobbly. He leans from side to side like a tiny sailor trying to stay upright in rough water. He's absolutely convinced that walking 3 feet across the room is the greatest achievement in human history. Honestly, he might not be wrong. Last weekend, Walter and Elaine came down from Dallas again. Walter stood outside grilling chicken while Elaine and I sat on the back steps drinking iced tea. Our son was completely fascinated by a garden hose. He studied it with the serious concentration of a scientist discovering an entirely new branch of science. Later that evening, Olivia came over carrying an expensive assortment of cheese. She also announced, without the slightest apology, that she intended to eat most of it herself. We laughed. We stayed outside until long after sunset. The string lights hanging across the fence made the backyard look like one of those photographs people frame because they never want to forget the moment. At one point, Elaine watched my son wobble across the grass toward Nathan. Nathan was crouched with his arms stretched wide, ready to catch him if he fell. Elaine smiled softly. He has no idea how lucky he is. I looked at my little boy. Then at Nathan waiting patiently for him. Then back at Elaine. He doesn't need to know yet, I said. That's exactly the way it's supposed to be. I grew up as a glass child. Invisible. Reliable. Expected to carry more than any child should. My son will never wonder whether his pain is an inconvenience. He'll never have to drive himself to a hospital because the people who should love him are too busy. He'll never sit silently at the end of a table feeling grateful just to have a place to sit. I drove myself down Interstate 35 at 73 miles an hour while I was in active labor because the people who were supposed to be my family cared more about listening to a con artist than helping their own daughter. That drive was the very last thing I ever did for them. Everything I've done since has been for the family we chose to build together.